I've been participating in the Krakow Festival of Jewish Culture for almost 30 years. Uh, the Krakow Festival for Jewish Culture was founded and is directed by Mr. Janusz Makuch with the amazing staff, Kasha Vaidra and Robert Gadel, and so many people who've done so much for so many years. And the organizers, they create a space or a space for remembrance, for vitality, where artists' voices can speak loud and clear, and we show the diversity that is Jewish culture and world culture. In today's discussion, we're so lucky, we're so fortunate to have three amazing artists from different places, from different musical traditions, from different personal traditions. And hopefully, by hearing the stories of each of the three of them, we're going to get just a small sense of this huge, huge world of Jewish music and Jewish culture. The program is called Shvirat He-Kelim, the scattered sparks of Jewish music. And good morning, afternoon, and evening, because in our three time zones, we have all three covered, morning, afternoon, and evening. Let's just start with short personal histories so that the people can get to know you. I'm going to ask, it's going to be funny because I'm going to say your name and then ask you to say your name. But where you're from, where are you sitting right now? When did you first perform at the Krakow Festival of Jewish Culture? How many times have you performed there? And just tell us a little bit about yourself and your music, what you're doing now, what you've done in the past that you feel good about. That's it. And let's start with Neta Elkayam. So,
Okay.
Neta, tell me.
Thank you. So my name is Neta Elkayam, as you said, and first of all, I started my path as an artist, a visual artist, and then 10 years ago I started with music. Since then, I really focus on music. I grew up in Israel. I was born in a southern, like small town on the border with Gaza. Its name is Netivot. And most of the population there were immigrants from North Africa, Jewish immigrants from North Africa. So I grew up pretty surrounded by this culture, but I never thought about it as really, I never defined it as a culture. I thought like this is something transparent around me, this is home. And outside, when I was learning and gaining my education, so I learned arts and I learned music, but I never made the connection between my background, my own background and roots, to the knowledge that was outside at those frameworks. So to make a long story short, I visited Morocco 12 years ago. And then since then, really, my life changed. I began to make the link to to understand the gap I had all this time. And I wanted to reclaim the language of my grandmother. I wanted to explore the music, to try to find my own voice through this culture. Of course, I didn't want to preserve or to make, to bring some old ancient tradition to be alive again. For me, I just wanted to be, inspired by this story and by this culture, and to learn more. And of course, through my music, to combine the old with the new and the contemporary. So I participated Krakow with my first project in 2014. It was a musical project named Hawajani, which I gave my own interpretation to a lot of Jewish tunes from the 50s, 60s that were, falling between the chairs, we say in Hebrew, naflu ben hakisot, because lots of musicians recorded here in Israel, but were never got popular because it wasn't so fashionable back at this time to speak another language than Hebrew. So most of this music really fell between the chairs and disappeared. And I looked for it with vinyls collectors. I went to old people houses, to old musicians' houses, in order to explore and to know more about those characters, those creators, and their music. The second time I participated Krakow was with a tribute to the great diva of the Jewish Moroccans, the artist Zohar El-Fassia. She was a pioneer, like a woman that created in a men's world. Practically, there weren't a lot of women recording back then, and she was really a pioneer by her, her interpretations to old classics, old Moroccan classics, and she touched a lot of genres. And we made a tribute in 2018, and we came with this tribute to Jewish Krakow Festival. And I'm very, very grateful because it was really, really something big. We made a big deal out of it. We brought 11 musicians with us, and the festival was amazing by accepting this complicated project. And last year we recorded also a video to the virtual actually festival that was in 2020 because of the corona. So I I was 3 times practically in Krakow, and I'm really grateful for the hosting and the stage that they give to different cultures from all around the Jewish world.
So I'm laughing because your story about going to old people's houses and searching for records is something that I identify with, and I get the feeling that Jeremiah and Raphael also I identify with. We're all like hunters seeking knowledge, no matter who we are.
Totally.
2 short questions because I don't think you said it. So where are you sitting right now? Where
I'm
are
sitting in my studio in Jerusalem.
you? In Jerusalem. Okay.
Yeah, in Jerusalem. It's been
What
10 years that I live here in Jerusalem.
And what is that language that you spoke and sung in that wasn't Hebrew? I mean, I think I know, but I don't want to make any assumptions. So, what is the language?
So now they call it Darija. I call it Moroccan Arabic. But some people, it's funny because it's still a debate. Some people would say it's not 100% Arabic because Moroccans are not Arabs, and it's a whole question. I mean, everything we're going to say in this discussion, I think it's always could make conflicts to people. Depends how they feel about this subject. But for me, I mean, I heard this language in my grandmother's house. It was the Moroccan Arabic popular dialect that they could reach to each other. They could communicate with each other, even though there were different dialects all around Morocco. But since they brought everybody together and mixed people from Fez and the south of Morocco, so they had to use one general language. So I guess I have a lot of words that still, only Jews used to use, but also people from Morocco could still understand most of it.
Perfect. Thank you. Raphael, you want to introduce yourself, tell us where you are, and tell us a little bit about your history with the festival and your music?
No tak, ja
Yes, I am now in Warsaw, very close to its neighborhood, very close to the forest. And Isaac Bashevis Singer came from this place, so I'm in the very center of the Polish Jewish world. I was born in Frankfurt am Main, in a refuge family from Poland, and this is where I spent the first years of my life in unusual mixture of refugees, of immigrants. And I understood only recently that I was really close to the contemporary refugees. I understood it with the Syrian crisis, that we do not differ much from them. My parents uh, got to know each other in Poland, but they fled from Poland separately, and they started to live among the refuge from Eastern Europe. These were Jews and Yugoslavians, a lot of Roma people, or Indians. So this world was really diverse, colorful, with a mixture of many languages that I could hear. So I had problem with starting to speak, with the ability to learn any language to speak. So I heard Yiddish, a lot of it, because although I was quite young, and I am quite young, I'm almost the second generation. So my father survived uh, the war. He was the Holocaust survivor. So our presence was tainted with Holocaust. And my uncle was there, and his growth was stopped by Dr. Mengele. So there were many tragedies that affected my family. And apart from these atrocities, it had another dimension of some very specific humor which came from the shtetl life, the forgotten life of a small Jewish town or a larger Jewish town with the shtetl mentality. I realized quite early that I needed to collect some sparkles from Kabbalah, and I had to collect them. At some point, I returned to Poland with my mother, and this culture sort of disappeared from my life. But when guitar came into my life, I started to identify myself with the tradition, and I came across by accident with the notes of old Jewish composer like Mordecai Gebirtig. And I was really excited that I'm getting these notes and the music is beginning to appear in my life. And I realized that I lived in some kind of emptiness, longing for something that I had in my childhood, but I could not grasp this culture in another way so that I could have some dialogue. So I was quite lonely with this, and I got to know some friends with whom we started to create first bands with Jewish music. We didn't want it to play in the fashionable manner, but we wanted to create them as if they came from the past, but played on contemporary instruments. That is why my first band was Zukunft, which means future in Yiddish. So it was like enchanting the contemporary times. We were really um, uh, aggressive, even in showing that the past exists in contemporary times, in the present. So I realized that this music made my longing and traumas more visible, coming from the stories not only of Jewish origin, because Poland is also marked, tainted with the disaster of war. So the war stories are present in many families, but also it was the aggressive search of an identification and showing that everything is alive. It was really important for me to show it because it was a kind of a manifesto against death, against dying, this tradition. So it was slightly on the verge of kitsch, even. So this is my short story.
Fantastic. I want to make comments to each of you, but let me get all three of you introduced first and then interject. By the way, Raphael, we've known each other for years, and I didn't know half of the stories that you just told right now. So thank you so much. Jeremiah Lockwood, same questions. Start with where you are and then take it from there.
Yeah. Well, I feel like I'm in a little trance or reverie from these beautiful stories that we just heard from Neta and Raphael. So thank you both for sharing those. I was born in New York City. I also grew up hearing Yiddish. I would say that Yiddish had a somewhat contested valence growing up. My grandmother spoke it to her mother, who was alive when I was a little boy, and it was the only language that they spoke. But my mother did not speak it at all, and there was this sort of sense that it was something that it was something that had become corrupted over time, that we had lost something, but also it itself was a source of corruption, and that if we spoke the language, we would be corrupted by it. And my mother did, she didn't want to speak, she did not want to speak Yiddish. It was an intentional split. So specific things about, life in America, that people want to get rid of the past as much as possible. But the past leaves its taint on you and is not easy to get rid of. So I'm from a family of musicians. My father is a classical composer, and whose music heavily influenced me as a kid, and we played music together a lot growing up. And my grandfather, my mother's father, was a well-known cantor. He was born kind of at the tail end of the period when cantorial music was a part of Jewish popular culture. He was singing at the Concord Hotel as their cantor for the holidays, and had major positions in different synagogues. And he had played an outsized role in our lives for everyone in the family. He was kind of like a legend in his own time, kind of character, and worshipful attitude towards him, but also very keenly aware of his humanity and his vulnerability, and his insane rituals around his voice. He would isolate himself for a month every year before the high holidays and not talk to anyone. A kind of a combination of anxiety about his health and also spiritual preparation. I'm in California, so I'm pretty far from where I grew up, but I'm about to come back. I mean, we already signed the lease on an apartment in Midwood in Brooklyn, so I'll be back with my family. So I've been out here for a bunch of years. I decided to write about cantorial music. So I've been playing music all my life, but I wanted to do a research project, and I came out to the University, Stanford, out here, and finished my PhD. I've written a dissertation about cantorial music in the Hasidic community, which is not what I thought I was going to be doing, but I got interested in the fact that there are young musicians in the Brooklyn Hasidic community who are into the same kind of music that my grandfather was making, this old time classic cantorial music, which is not associated with the Hasidic community at all. So I was intrigued by what was going on here. Basically what I came to is that singing cantorial music is a kind of in the current day is a kind of a way of doing something which marks you as an outsider to the Jewish community in a way, or marks you as someone who is commenting on the normative world of Jews and Judaism, because the music has been so rejected by the community. So there's this some kind of very strange and interesting and disturbing thing has happened, where the music went from being deeply loved and understood as the voice of the people to being kind of like reviled, right? It's like been pretty much exiled from its place in the synagogue. Anyway, I mean, I've been thinking about this for many years now, and still I'm trying to wrap my head around it. I think it has to do with the fact that cantors sound like they're in multiple worlds at once, and this is increasingly difficult for people to handle, right? Like what is going on here? Is this a man's voice or a woman's voice that I'm hearing crying and screaming and moaning and making these, kind of almost what people describe, as being like this kind of animalistic kind of sounds. What is going on with this voice? But it also sounds like an opera singer. what is the sound of a Jew? Why does the sound of a Jew need to invoke both the sublime heights of European classical music and also these sounds of almost like a animalistic moaning? How can that be our voice? How can we be modern people living in this country and trying to make good money, and that's going to represent who we are? And so there's a kind of a switch in the mentality of Jewish people around our own voice and our own language, and I love the paradoxes of it. You know, I love the fact that it's a commercial art form, right? And cantors talk about money all the time, how much they're going to make, what the different synagogues pay them. You know, back in the days, it was about record contracts, and you know, and of course, it's been a long time since any cantors had record deals with major labels. But that was, you know, that was the case for the first 3-4 decades of the 20th century. So I also love blues. You know, that was when I wanted to become a musician. It was because I loved blues music, and but I feel that listening to old records of cantorial music with my grandfather kind of primed me to be able to understand something about early blues records, or to be listening for the sounds of ghosts and hidden histories in the sound of old 78 RPM records. Listening to music, listening to records is the mystical act for me in my life. And you know, we're talking about gathering those sparks. The crate diving for the old records is, you know, I mean, the fact that this signifies or reads as an act of gathering in the residue from the broken vessels of the creative act that brought the universe into existence is not ambiguous. Okay, so those are a few facts about me and my life. I've been at the Krakow Festival 3 times. The first 2 times were with my band, the Sway Machinery, and this is a project I started to explore cantorial music, the cantorial music tradition, but using the idiomatic language that I developed studying the guitar and playing blues with elder blues musicians. I had a relationship throughout my youth with a blues musician named Carolina Slim, who passed away almost 7 years ago, and he was a very formative influence on me. And I decided pretty early on that I wasn't going to try to make my way as a musician as a blues musician, even though that's by far the thing I'm most qualified to do. Like, I'm much better at that than singing cantorial music. I mean, I'll never be as good as a cantor as my grandfather. I just accept that. But Carolina Slim's music, I know I can sit down and play his music. I mean, I spent, you know, 2 decades, you know, spending hours with him all the time. You know, it's much more natural for me to play that music than to play Ashkenazi liturgical music. But nevertheless, this is a decision I made fairly early on in life, was that I was going to pursue this kind of multi-tiered music making path where I had to be in both of these worlds at once. Okay, so I'll leave it there. Oh, and the 3rd time I was at the festival was with Frank. I was playing guitar in one of Frank's projects. And I've known Frank for a long time, and we made a record together. I'm moving right now, and I found I have 100 copies of the record that we made together. Whose idea was it to print all those CDs? Oh my goodness.
I'm sorry. We'll talk about this later. Wow, fantastic. Wow. And I just want to point out that I love that with all of you, right from the very beginning, there is a real connection between music making and your personal histories, explorations of that. And you each said it in different ways. And there's so many directions to go. But let's start with this. I'm going to come from a little bit of what Jeremiah just said. And I'm looking, if I'm not looking at the screens, because I was taking notes and looking at my paper. So you just said, we're calling this Shvirat He-Kelim, the scattered sparks. And this is a Kabbalistic concept that I'm familiar with, that many of us are, but many people are not. And Jeremiah, you gave a good succinct description. You called it the residue from the broken vessels that was the creative act that brought the world into existence. That's a good summation of it. The idea, just in really fast, let's see if I can do Kabbalah in 3 seconds while standing on one foot. God is everything, and if God is everything, there's no room for anything else. So somehow God has to contain God's self in these vessels, which, in order to make room for God to create the universe, but the vessels break, and when the shards of the vessels hit each other, they make sparks, and these sparks spring out and are the sparks of creation. And in many ways, whether you believe it as fact, mysticism, or metaphor, or story, it is a way of looking at the diversity of the world's cultures. Okay, so that's the discussion. It's a mystical concept. But Jeremiah also mentioned a number of things about money. He, what we might say is a very secular, a very quotidian concern, but one that concerns many of us. How do I make a living? And Jeremiah said something about, a cantor used to make good money, have recording contracts, talked about this aspect. So I want to ask each of you, being that we're having this conversation, it's about music, it's got a sacred, Kabbalistic, mystical title, but we're also all, to different extents, working musicians. Do you think of your music in religious terms, or in cultural terms, or in spiritual terms, or in strictly musical terms, like what chord am I going to use and what sound am I going to use? Or maybe, especially Neta, I didn't know that you were a visual artist first. Maybe you think in aesthetic, visual terms with your music, or are you thinking in commercial terms? So that's a very broad question. And let's start with Raphael about this.
Well, I think that first of all, I think of my music as something more mystical. I do not play only Jewish music, but my own music looks for some source somewhere, and this source is the largest inspiration for me. And for me, the Jewish this is Jewish tradition, and in that I'm concentrating on mystical aspects. I published a record with Nigunim, and I'm exploring Hasidic history of Poland, but it has not always been like that. At the start, we played Jewish street music, which was connected with gangsters a little bit, slightly leftist, and it was the music of cabarets. And this is what we were concentrating on, because we believed that we had to make these people more tangible, more physical, and we wanted to show that there is some folklore which can be attractive for contemporary people. And we reached with this music in the sexual minority clubs or underground experiments or in many galleries. And later on, we reached the festival, but it was later. So recently, I have been thinking about the mystical dimension of music. Every music that I play, every kind of music that I play, I don't know if it's the question of my age or of the pandemic, but I'm now concentrating on the mystical aspect of Jewish culture.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
Span-
Jeremiah?
Yes.
Same question.
No, I mean the answer is yes. I mean, it's all of the above. I mean, it's
Okay, let me push.
I'm messing with you, Frank.
No. you're in the best way. How do
Yeah.
you balance these things? How do you negotiate these things?
Well, I mean, at the moment, I think it's a lot about what it's going to make me feel. So this perhaps is a product of the pandemic, because that's not always been the case. But I'm seeking a feeling, or maybe just to feel something, right? Like there's like the status quo of the last year has been a lot of anxiety, and some fair amount of fear, and then also, I've got a family, it's like trying to keep it cool, keep it entertaining for the kids, keep life, stable and human and loving. But like the inner life is it's pulsing with a lot of pain, I would say. So I'm looking to music to be, it's going to create a counter world. So I would say this is also, there's a kind of it has a mystical valence to it as well. Whereas like I was thinking about meditation in Jewish prayer, right? So the idea, I think when people talk about meditating, oftentimes we're looking to a Zen Buddhist tradition where you're going to be kind of pushing out a lot and trying to get things down to a single thing, or even maybe even if you reach a high enough plateau with this, you'll get to a nothingness. And while people talk a lot about parallels between Judaism and Buddhism in the United States, at least that's a popular comparison to draw. Jewish meditation is almost the opposite, right? Where you're meditating, you're trying to do multiple worlds at once, right? The classic example is like the mystical commentary on the prayer text from the Sfat mystics, so it's like from Isaac Luria and his students, right, where they created another text on top of the prayer text. And the idea is that if you're praying correctly, you're going to have both of these texts superimposed upon each other, and you're going to be looking at both of them at once and creating both of them at once. And then the Hasidic masters thought about something like that as well, right? That like while you're praying, you should be visualizing a whole other thing that's going on, like you're walking through palaces or you're in the forest, right? That you can actually create multiple worlds inside yourself at once. And so I want music to do that. I want the music to create a counter text, and the counter text, it's gonna be doing all the things, right? It's gonna be making me feel something, waking me up a little bit, and then offering something to other people. And then what Raphael was talking about the music having to speak the voice of the people and be on the street. I mean, that's yes, that's very, very key. We have more than one face, right? And the music has to speak to both of them. And so using tools from the mystical tradition is helpful in articulating that.
So in a sense, you want to embrace the complexity in your music and in your practice, in a sense, these multiple worlds, these different levels, deeper, richer, this way, this way, this way, this way.
Yeah. I mean, it's you don't want it to feel like homework, though. I mean, at the end of the day, the music has to sound, it has to feel good to people, right? I mean, so like the what is creating the feeling is the complexity and the texture, but what people are feeling might be something that they're not going to articulate at all, other than like, oh, I want to feel that. I want to receive that sensation.
And I think that's what Raphael sort of referred to when you were talking about by going into the underground clubs and everything. Neta, do you want to talk a little bit about, if I'm suspecting that you're also going to say that it's a mixture of things, but talk about it in your...
Actually, I wanted to say something, one thing, but then, Jeremiah, I mean, while you were speaking, I couldn't not think about the woman role and the woman inside the society of Jewish practice, Jewish men practicing their own Judaism, and we are standing outside the synagogue and not really able to take part of your prayers. I will start as a kid. I mean, I was the firstborn in my family, and my father is religious and is practicing Judaism and is going to every Friday to the synagogue. And this was the first concerts I heard in my life, and I really wanted to be part of it. And as someone who has the talent and the gift from God to sing, I waited to my own turn to go on stage and to read the Torah, but it never happened. When I was 12, I've been sent to sit behind the curtain. So actually, it's funny because nowadays I'm starting, and I'm completely in another zone of Moroccan music. I found in the archive of the National Library here in Jerusalem recordings from a transit camp in Marseille named Arenas, and there were amazing recordings of women that came from the south of Morocco, the Atlas Mountains, and actually they were singing something like spiritual kind of songs. This music, of course, it was outside of the synagogue, but it helped them to rise above the reality. I mean, they were actually like, when you listen to blues, I mean, most of it is based on the fact that people were, working very hard, and they were dealing with the real life. I don't know. I don't have enough vocabulary to just say. I mean, people were like slaves, and also the women in Morocco, in a way, they were working all day around the house, around the Jewish life. If there was a Brit Milah, they needed to make all the food. If there was a Chatuna, they were the one to work and to make all the ceremony and the celebration. But in order to rise above those things and to make it spiritual, and to go through this experience in a way that they will also could also participate and practice Judaism, they invented songs. And the songs are really different from what I used to sing until now. It has more pentatonic scales, and they are repetitive. And most of those songs were, they were singing it in together in chorus. And there was a leader that leaded actually the improvisation, and all the women joined her and answered her, and one piece of song could also last for 8 hours or 9 hours. I mean, it depends how much work or how long the ceremony took in time. So actually, I fell in love in this recordings, and I found out that women, I mean, they had their own way to practice Judaism outside the synagogue. I found that also the worshiping of the holy people, the tzaddikim, and all the visits to their graves. First, I thought about it like, okay, it's so primitive. I mean, why go to adore someone who dies? I mean, all Judaism is about life. Why they needed to go to worship those dead people? And then I understood that it was a chance for them to be liberated, to go out of their house, out of their Jewish neighborhoods, to pilgrim and to sing all the way there. And most of a lot of songs that I found were songs about also tzaddikim. And it was funny for me to find that those women, that they were asking desperately to be part of Judaism, but in their own way, and they created genres of music in order to to be part of it. So it's really mystical. It's also meditative, and you can only imagine what they were doing while they were singing those songs. I mean, working and working and working, but also connecting through this work into a meditative place and connecting God.
Each of you brings up so many issues. My mind is sort of exploding, and all I can do is take notes and make sure that we get back to everything because there's only one at a time. So I want to say, absolutely, later on in this talk, we will explore specifically issues about women in Jewish music. We have to talk about that. And I'm also, each of you has talked in a certain way about Jewish music and Jewish practice, and we'll talk about them. But for now, I want to just shift the conversation a little bit, something that I find very important, and maybe it's a little more personal than some of these other more general and historical questions. So why are the three of you here? Why are the four of us here? Well, to a certain extent, yes, you're great artists, you're committed artists, you each have your own voice, you've done so much. This is, of course, a given. But in a sense, you were chosen for this panel not only for your tremendous work as an artist and the bodies of work that you've created, but because in a way you each represent something. And you represent a different sort of, I don't even know always the words to use, and I am a native English speaker, so I don't even have the vocabulary. So a national identity, an ethnic identity, Neta being a Israeli but a Moroccan Jew, Raphael, Polish, Jeremiah on one hand. I don't know if your family was from Poland or somewhere in East Europe, but for you, Jeremiah, and I identify quintessentially an American Jew who is probably as you said, more at home with the blues of Carolina Slim to a certain extent than with Jewish music, even though you do so much work in Jewish music. So I want to preface my question with a little anecdote about my life, but I'll keep it short. My first tour of Europe, I was with an amazing African-American artist named Lester Bowie, one of the cutting edge of jazz. My second European tour as a musician, I was with the greatest Latin musicians of the world. And also, And then the third one was with the Klezmatics. And I found that the European market couldn't sell me, Frank London, as an African-American musician or a Latin musician, but boy, was I perfect, or me and the Klezmatics, to sell as Jewish musicians. We're from New York, I represented New York Yiddish music, and the Klezmatics did. And as Jeremiah said, this didn't make sense because at that point, this is 35 years ago, I was much more at home. I still am, but much more at home with Latin music and jazz. But I was called to represent it. So you're being called here, and I think part of the question is, are you each fully aware that part of this is that you are representing something? And how do you feel about being asked to represent a certain culture, a certain group, a certain history, as opposed to just being yourself? Raphael, Neta, Jeremiah, you are individuals. Shouldn't that be enough? Or do you feel actually fine that you have in representing a culture or a tradition in your music? So that's the question. It bothers me a lot. I think about it a lot. Jeremiah, do you want to dive in on that one?
Sure, yeah. Well, I mean, I think there's some differences in that, in terms of like I don't know. I don't think I've been sold yet, basically. I mean, like the Klezmatics were a real sensation on a commercial level. That hasn't been the case in my career. I mean, thank God I've had opportunities and am able to work as a musician. But I'm not sure. I feel like if I'd stayed in the blues world, I might have had more commercial success, actually, just because it would have been a normal thing for me to do. And also cantorial music is
I'm going to interrupt a little bit.
What?
From the outside point of view.
Yeah.
You've seen, as I said, in this panel, you're the American. So that's one thing. And I've noticed for myself that whenever I travel the world, one of the things I am, no matter what I feel, I'm the American there. And let's just...
Yeah.
And secondly, you're the Jew who brings in, you're the Jewish musician. Of course, Raphael, you do this also, but we'll get to you in a moment. You do the same thing, but you bring in these African American roots elements and things like that. I mean, I hate to be crass and talk about how we're being sold, but to a certain extent, you are already being sold. So
no, you're right. You're right. I'm not gonna back on it too hard. It's certainly a reasonable thing to say. Basically, I don't. Do I exist? What do any of us here? And if we are, to what are the lineages that brought us to this moment? You know, and they're not just our biological ones, obviously. So I look, every moment has 1,000 strands that led up to it. So you're only going to be able to represent some of them in a conscious way, but they're all there. I don't know if that's germane or not. You know, I have looked at the yichus issue of, like, my grandfather was a great cantor, and my uncle and other cantors, and it's, you know, it's an intergenerational situation where, you know, there's it's not that anyone ever said to me, oh, you have to do this. On the I mean, you know, there were all kinds of opportunities were offered to me to do other things, but in my mind, there's a certain sense of there being a legacy that I feel that I want to do something with, or that there's an ethical charge in keeping this music present in the world. I feel the same way about Carolina Slim's music, though. I mean, because he didn't have a ton of other students, right? And so he and two of his other students who are great musicians, and we get together and do his music. And that's kept me in that field more since he passed away. Basically, I've started working with his music more. I don't know. I mean, I think that in terms of framing what I'm doing commercially, it's esoteric, basically. Like, I accept the fact that there's an esoteric quality to what I do, and that it fits into certain things at moments, and at other times it can disappear from public view, and nobody's going to come to that, right? Like, it's so I'm. Basically, you're asking a question that has a couple of different parts. One is about, you know, something into your process of making the music, and why do you choose to name yourself as an artist rather than some other aspect of a modern identity. Right? When you say, oh, you're just Jeremiah, well, what is just, you know, I mean, who is that person? Like a kid who was born in New York, you know, is an American. I don't know, what would be the music that I would be supposed to make then? I mean, you know, it's not obvious to me that I have a cultural milieu where there's an obvious form of music that comes from it. You know, particularly growing up like in the, you know, New York in the 80s and 90s. I mean, it's just everything was there. I mean, that was the nature of music in that scene. I mean, you remember, Frank, you were a leading person in making that world. You know, there was a multiplicity, and the multiplicity was the norm. And so that multiplicity has reduplicated itself, and it's now, you know, music that draws on multiple worlds is even more the norm, and that's in the popular music. That's, to some extent, that's true. I mean, certainly in hip hop, where sampling from anything is normal and even commercial. That's the one side, and then the other side is like about how you're going to brand yourself commercially. And that one, I mean, I think I you know, I don't know. That's the work in progress, basically. Like, I mean, what I want to talk about is something that's esoteric and like painful and difficult, and, you know, then it's going to make you cry. I'm going to sing for you, and you're going to cry from this. You know, it's going to hurt you. So people like that some of the time. Maybe they just want it on Yom Kippur. You know, maybe they don't want it every day. So I'm yeah, okay, maybe I'll leave it at that.
Neta, you seem, I'm guessing, you seem very comfortable in this newfound role. It's only, as you said, the last 10 years of sort of representing through your music Moroccan Jewish and Moroccan Jewish women's music. And I think you do it very well. I think you're an amazing ambassador. But is there, do you feel perfectly fine with that role, or?
No.
Oh, good. Talk to us.
No, you know, artists hate when people try to make them representative of other people or a group or groups. I think your question is very, very hard. It's like asking who is the Jew. I mean,
We'll get to that later, by the way.
okay. But it reminds me a sentence that one of my favorite writers once said. He's actually Jewish Tunisian, lived in France. And he said, when you first meet a person, you meet his whole history. I mean, there are a lot of aspects into the thing of representation. I mean, is it my DNA? Is it something, is it providence from God that, you know, he chose me to do that? Is it myself? Is it the society that picks me to be the one who tells the story of my own kind of people? So it's really a big question, and I think it's something that always made me curious and inspired me. I mean, I used it in order to create my art. Sometimes I played with those stereotypes that people, you know, expected me to be. So I said to myself, okay, now I'm going to be sad all day and to say, okay, all the people around me defined me, and I don't want to be defined. Or I'll just take those, you know, comments and the way people see me and create with it and try to challenge it. So actually, I feel that maybe I started my own path. I mean, the first point as a kid that I, you know, I also grew up in the 80s, and Israel is very different from New York. The opposite. We've been expected to be one thing. We've been expected to be not multiple, but Israelis. You know, forget about the history of Judaism in different backgrounds. Talk Hebrew, and also we felt that from our houses. I mean, we grew up, you know, with our parents, you know, pushing us to be the new Israel, the new Jewish person. Forget about being Russian and Ethiopian or Moroccan, or forget about the differences. And for me, I mean, the first point of, you know, exploring was the first moment I looked in the mirror and I felt that I'm physically not the same as other people. I mean, I have my unique form, and everybody has another unique form. And maybe it's because I'm an artist and visual artist, and I'm painting, and I'm looking looking on the external shape of people, and it made me be very interested in exploring that. I mean, what does it mean? And it shocked me when I went to Morocco and I looked like everyone else, even though I had, you know, in my head a different diskette. So yeah, so this is a very big question, and I think I'm trying to take it into makom afre, like to create out of it, and not to be, you know, sad about being defined all the time by other people. You know, you are world music, you are feminine, you are Jewish. I have a lot of shelves on the, you know.
I can't even begin to tell you how much I empathize and agree with what you're saying in my own life. Raphael, I mean, musically, weirdly, I feel the closest affinity between myself and you because of your specific mixture. The elements in your music are really so much the same elements that are in my music. A lot of rock and roll, a lot of improvisation, and, you know, more avant-garde jazz, avant-garde classical, and the Jewish spiritual things. I mean, in many ways, not that the other two of you don't do that also, but I've always felt that. And so weirdly, we're from thousands of miles from each other, but we have been exploring the same terrain. But again, here you are, and you're not even born in Poland, which is fascinating. I didn't even know that. Um, how do you feel? Do you feel like you can represent? Oh, and I want to throw in one more thing just to complicate this. It always disturbed me in my years of being in Poland that Jews have lived in Poland for 1,000 years, been citizens, or I don't know if you're citizens, but lived in Poland for generations. And yet a distinction is made between calling someone a Pole, which means a Catholic, and a Polish Jew or a Jewish Pole. So how do you feel like, given all of this complexity, how do you feel as the Polish representative on our panel, and often at the festival, you're the Polish artist? How do you feel about that representation that you're being asked to fill?
U mnie to jest też bardziej skomplikowane, bo
With me it is more complex because I found some Italian roots to my family and some Islamic ones, or Uzbekistan descent. So I do not feel to be a Pole. I'm an Eastern European rather. So who I am, I'm the effect of Eastern Europe. So perhaps it's quite exotic, but at some point it was really normal. This mixture of blood and of various origins is quite typical. And some time ago it was even more popular. So, as Neta said, Poland through communism, well, communism was the denial of it, but Poland wanted to be national, had to have only one nation here, and did not to have too many complications. So for me, as Jeremiah said, I started with blues and psychedelic music, and I wanted to be like John Lee Hooker and not like Mordecai Gibirtik. So at some point, I felt some longing for something that is really close, coming from my own childhood, something that I did not find in reality. Also, some smells, senses. It was very sensual when I was in Poland. I wanted to lay down on the grass under a tree. Perhaps it was an apple tree close to my own house, very close to the house where Isaac Singer lived, and think that perhaps he would lie down in the same time, in the same way. Also, I visited Hasidic graves in Poland. I was in Alimelech from Leżajsk, so it was an empty place and the wind was blowing. And when I was in Ohel, everything was tainted with the wind that was created the noise with the metal door of the Ohel. So I felt haunted even. So in Poland we live like together with ghosts. In Poland there are a lot of ghosts, and we as people who are conscious need to talk to them, learn from them, and be ready to accept knowledge from them, wisdom. And if I could compare myself to anybody or anyone, I would say that I'm a medium, I'm a vessel which needs to be beautiful and clean, but filled with knowledge of the ghost, knowledge of the past, but also I need to be ready for future. That is why I perceive my own activity, my own music, as a medium, as a transmission. Certainly, it's filtered through my own interests, but this is mostly what corresponds to how I perceive my own mission, because this needs to be called that with this culture or many minorities, for example, Roma people, they do not have their representation like Jewish Culture Festival. There is one festival of Gypsy culture, which is quite kitschy, and there is no real Gypsy culture which could be an avant-garde or which could respond to the call of the times. I worked with the gypsies and we tried to make some new things. So all the aspects of my music are varied. Also, I played African music. So I recorded pieces to develop language from Senegal. But in these all things, I'm ready to accept some knowledge. You can say knowledge of our forefathers. Before I started to play African music, I had a series of dreams at night when I flew over Dakar and I was an eagle. And I woke up in the morning and started to play African music. And I felt that it's in my fingers. So I believe that we in Poland, we are very sensitive uh, to the cooperation with our ancestors, with the ghosts, and with something that floats in the air. So this is how I perceive it.
I, I I get the feeling that each of you are saying something very similar. Neta, just in short, because we have more things, but did you feel, I mean, Jeremiah, I have a feeling that, to use Raphael's language, in a certain way, you're communing with the ghosts of your grandfather, the Chazan, and others. And Neta, I wonder if you felt, I mean, the way, when you made that first trip to Morocco, if you felt again that, I'm going to use his language, the connection with the ghosts and
I think a bit of the spirit of my grandmother is inside of me. I believe, like, we just read the Megillah of Ruth. I believe that God exists in people that we know through our lives, and when you get attached to a person, like grandfather in Jeremiah's case, and my case is my grandmother. I was very attached to her, and I was growing up very close to her. And since the moment we separated, I think our souls, I mean, a little bit, melted with each other. And yes, this is my ghost. I mean, sometimes it's very heavy on my shoulders, but I feel this. It's very strong in my life, and it drives me to the places I got from the first place. It drives me.
it's funny. I'm going to pick up on something you said in 1 second, but I just want to, Raphael, I want to just challenge you with one thought that occurred to me while you were talking. To a great extent, and I speak from personal experience, to a great extent, especially in our lifetime, the Jew, the white Jew, is very assimilated in American society. Jeremiah, more or less true-ish, right? And obviously, Neta, and again, these are oversimplifications. Israel, as a Jewish state, is supposed to be the place where the Jew is not the other. That's, we're supposed to have a place where the Jew is not the other. But in Poland, tell me, and this is a kind of a question, it seems like the Jew, even in spite of the thousands of years, the 1,000-year history and stuff, the Jew is always the other. Not the only other. There are, like you say, Roma, other. There are other others, but definitely the Jew is other in Polish society. And if you agree with me, if you disagree with me, tell me. But if you agree, then my question is, just can you imagine, just like imagination, if the Jew was not other in Polish society, if you were allowed to fully, growing up and everyone, fully be Polish and Jewish, and it was just one aspect of it, but if it wasn't, if it wasn't other, if you would have a different identity as a Pole, it's a hard question. I'm probably not saying it right.
Mhm. Ja w,
Well,
ja znaczy tak, no.
yes, there is some burden in Eastern Europe because it's in the entire Eastern Europe in which we realize that, well, worldwide people are sort of divided. So in Eastern Europe, fascism and communism left a mark, which is really painful. But on the other hand, I was never afraid. I was never scared of my origin when I played concert in France during the Intifad, or when I was traveling with a band playing Jewish music, and this was really scary. We had the security support, and I started to think about it from a different point of view. Or when I played in Germany, when it turned out that there was a march of neo-Nazi, and in the evening they made some riots in the streets. So in Poland, I had never had such experience. Certainly, I came across anti-Semitism, but Polish anti-Semitism, I would always say it's sort of rural or provincial. So there is more stupid talk in it than real threat. It's legendary worldwide. But I was really surprised that you would never talk about French anti-Semitism, which is much more organized than that in Poland.
Go.
Więc
So I'm trying not to think about it much. So world is divided in every country in Europe. In every country in Europe, there's a strange politician ruling. You had Donald Trump not a very long time ago. So we are struggling with some strange histories and strange people. But I never wonder about it. So I try to be some Eastern European, someone from Galicia, someone from Eastern Europe, which is sort of open. I'm also interested in the Bronze Age. So when we never asked such questions, when we wanted to explore our diversity to create cities or to become sailors or travelers, explorers. I'm also interested in geographic discoveries, and I keep wondering about the impulse when we connect and when we are together. So let me refer to our discussion. We talked for some time, and I have known you for longer, but I think that we could build a boat and set off for a journey and try to experience an unusual adventure. So, with a little bit of a talk, we can create it with many people. You need to talk to people simply.